Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first ever Next in Tech podcast. The top 3 surprises in 2021 IT trends. So today we're going to look at how 2021 is shaping up compared to some of our projections on trends in IT infrastructure, AI and machine learning, digital and customer experience. I'm joined today by Simon Robinson, head of research for the 451, part of S&P Global Market Intelligence. Simon, welcome to today's webinar.
Hey, thanks, Eric. Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
Well, we've got a lot of interesting data. If we think about a lot of what we accumulate from the research perspective, there are a whole set of different capabilities that we've got. And one of the things we wanted to talk about are the surprises that we've seen in some of the data for this year. And there are 3 general areas I want to touch on. First is cloud workload repatriation. The second is customer experience and corporate performance. And the third is ML, machine learning, project success rates. So let's dive into the data. The first of these is a question of, is workload repatriation from the cloud a thing? We talk about the movement of workloads back and forth from cloud, back on-prem, and there's been a lot of conversation about really sort of what this means and where workloads are going. What do you think about that, Simon, and what's the data show us?
Yeah, so thanks again. Thanks for having me. And I guess, we've got this, this is a surprise. What is the surprise here? I guess the surprise is that we're still talking, or that there's still an industry narrative around this notion of repatriation that has been there has been around for a few years, and it is kind of persistent in some respects. And there has been a big discussion about it this year. Now, before we dive into this, let's look at some of the context, perhaps. So our data shows that of all of the organisations that we're surveying, only about 7% of respondents today are not using any form of cloud. So let's just get it out of the way that cloud is real and it's here and it's being used, in very meaningful ways, had profound impact on our industry. Although about half of respondents are still mostly on-prem, we see that close to another half, about 43%, are either mostly or entirely in the public cloud. And this is a proportion that continues to grow. But as you say, we still keep hearing this term repatriation, the idea that workloads that have moved from on-prem to the public cloud are now moving back on-prem. So it is important to look at this trend in a bit more detail, and we have a couple of perspectives. So first, we asked in a data center focused IT professional group whether this was happening. Is this notion of workloads migrating from the public cloud back to a on-prem environment? Is that happening? And we see that actually for that data center professional audience, it is about half of respondents, 48%, said that had happened to some degree. And if we drill further into that, we see that the vast majority are moving that workload or workloads to their own infrastructure. And about a third are moving to somebody else's infrastructure, such as a hosted private cloud, for example. But this is saying that it is happening. It's not saying how many of those workloads are happening. It's not, and certainly we don't believe that all of those workloads have moved. And I think we also need to bear in mind that this is an audience that don't that have their own data centers. These are also data center operators. The other aspect is that we've been asking this question for several years, and the proportion of respondents who say they have migrated a workload has fallen from around 70% in 2016, as we see, to just about half today. So that's one perspective. Now, interestingly, when we ask a more cloud-focused audience the same question, we get a very different response. So only about 6% of users of IaaS or PaaS have migrated a workload from cloud to an on-prem location. And over 80% have not in the last 12 months and have no plans to. And again, when we look at the linear data here, we've seen a big fall in respondents who've performed this migration over the last few years. It was up at about 34% who said they'd done this migration in 2016. So I guess the point to this is, what does it tell us? Well, it tells us a few things. Firstly, whether this is happening or not depends on who you ask. It's on the type of audience that you're talking to, and it is varied within that audience. The second point is that if you're already all in on public cloud, then you don't really have the option to move on-prem, at least not without a fair amount of effort. And the final point, and perhaps most important, is we believe that this entire notion of repatriation is itself a little bit misleading. It suggests that this is a permanent transition, from the public cloud back to on-prem. That it was a kind of an experimental phase, and those workloads weren't fit for purpose in cloud, and then got pulled back. And the data just doesn't support that is happening. We prefer to think about this as, workload mobility, and we are entering a new phase of cloud adoption. Organizations are becoming more familiar, more skilled with cloud. The options are becoming more mature, and they're becoming better placed to determine what we've talked about for a long time, actually, as the best execution venue. What is the best location for a particular workload? And that best location may change several times over time. And that really is a function of multiple factors around cost, performance, governance, and so on. And ultimately, this is about application mobility and leveraging what we have here, which is a very hybrid IT architecture. Moving workloads will cease to be a one-off event, and I think increasingly is becoming just a standard IT practice.
So the data is really pointing towards a maturing of cloud operational capabilities to a point at which organizations are now starting to really understand where they can place workloads, how they build application architectures to work in the cloud, getting beyond what was that elemental stage of, let's just pitch it in the cloud and see whether or not it runs kind of thing.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case, and I think we are seeing that maturity where the supporting infrastructure, the monitoring, the measurement tools and capabilities that allow organizations to make these types of decisions in a much more fluid way are becoming much more capable, and that's unleashing a whole new kind of generation of cloud deployment.
It's one of those things that we've actually talked recently about on the Next in Tech podcast about the infrastructure requirements. You have to have the telemetry, the observability to be able to understand how those workloads are performing and where you can place them best.
Absolutely.
Before we get too far afield, I wanted to talk about some of the data that we're talking about here. For those in our audience that aren't familiar with it, this data is coming out of the 451 Alliance. It's a part of S&P Global Market Intelligence, and it's the source of a lot of the information that we're talking, or for all of the information that we're talking about today. Of course, with the insights provided by analysts to take a look at that data, but the Alliance itself is a membership organization. It's dedicated to forecasting trends in enterprise IT, technology, business, and macroeconomics. The way that it works is that working professionals from all industries and locales around the globe can qualify if they're involved in or knowledgeable about IT decision-making at their company. They apply online, and once they're approved, they get free membership. Membership is sustained by participation in short online surveys, and those responses are anonymized and aggregated. Our analysts cull the data to produce the insights we're discussing today, and Alliance members receive full research reports each week in addition to member digests, webinars, and other benefits. Our research spans over a dozen different categories, and if you're interested in joining, 451alliance.com/NIT will get you started in that process. And the results are what you're seeing here for a lot of the data that's here. It's great peer benchmarking data, and it gets used as perspectives in terms of technology strategy and a range of different aspects that can be useful for enterprises of all sizes and locations. So let us head towards surprise number 2. Can customer experience affect corporate performance? I know we talk a lot about customer experience driving revenue, but here we're actually shifting to think about corporate performance itself. So Simon, what does this really mean, and what are the impacts that we happen to have seen? This is something that's actually bringing in 451 Alliance data, some S&P data about index information, and some correlation that actually is bringing together a whole set of very powerful data sets.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's that really is why this is so exciting. And I think, it helps to demonstrate just how powerful the combination of 451 research's data and expertise with other S&P capabilities is just so very powerful. The research itself is interesting, particularly because it emphasizes how important digital strategy is to a company's overall strategy. And kind of intuitively, we know that, and certainly as industry analysts, we've been talking about that for years. But now we have some data points that really kind of underscore how strong those links are. So let me talk a bit about what we've done here. So what we've done here is created a piece of research that identifies and explains a correlation between technology investment and financial performance. Brand new piece of research, as you say, it's a joint effort between multiple groups here at S&P 451, the ratings team, data science team. Really great collaboration. So the topic here is CX, so specifically the digital customer experience. And what we did was look at the instances of CX terms in earnings transcripts. So this is the incidence of terms like digital transformation, cloud, customer experience, SaaS, CRM, AI, digital marketing. We looked at the incidence of those terms in the earnings transcripts of about 10,000 companies. And we used the relative incidence of those terms by those companies in their earnings calls and transcripts to classify companies into one of 3 categories, which are shown here. So digital leaders, digital learners, and what we call the digitally delayed. And what we found was that the digital leaders drove higher equity returns than learners. So if we kind of flip to this next slide here. So the leaders drove higher equity returns than learners, who in turn performed better than the laggards, those digitally delayed. Now, we should note that this is a correlation, not necessarily a causation, but the findings are really powerful, I think. And what's interesting is that they're consistent across almost all segments that we analyzed, and we looked at about 13 different verticals through this research project. So it's research like this that allows us to dig deeper into these trends to provide more substance on why some of these are happening. Companies that are investing in technology tend to perform better. And clearly, this is going to place more emphasis on technology and digital transformation overall. And not to digress too much, but one really interesting kind of supporting aspect to this is the things that we're seeing in the merger and acquisition market. So in tech M&A in particular, this year it's just absolutely exploded. So far this year, we've seen over $1 trillion in tech M&A. That's a trillion with a T. We've never seen anything like this. It's more than double anything that we have on record, and we've been covering this market for the last 20 years. And we still have a quarter of the year to go, just past the $1 trillion space. And there are multiple factors that are driving this: the rise of special acquisition companies, the so-called SPACs, the role of private equity, record equity prices overall. But this does help to underscore just how powerful and important having the right technology in place is, because it does seem to be driving company performance. Sorry, go on.
And I'll make a plug there quickly for our M&A knowledge base. Where did we get those numbers from? The M&A knowledge base. But it is one of these revelations, I guess, for me in many ways, in that we've been trying for so long to quantify the benefits of investment and digitization, and it's one of these pieces. And here, again, within the constraints of what the research is showing us, it's a really strong indicator that, in fact, these investments are starting to pay off.
No, absolutely. And I think, one of the questions that our team is looking at, and again, I should call out the work that Cheryl Kingstone in particular is doing on our customer experience research side, because that's really underpinning much of this. But it's really understanding, okay, how is this going to translate into the strategies that businesses are going to be pursuing to improve experience? We kind of know as consumers how important that consumer experience is, driving things like, loyalty, and whether we follow through with purchases, and whether we come back after making purchases online and so forth. But obviously, this is also crucially important in the business setting. And our data here is also showing that many experiences are, well, let's say there's room for improvement in terms of the business customer experience. And again, just think about how many of those organizations in that segmentation we did are digitally delayed. It's only 20% that are actually at the forefront. We've still got the vast majority of the market are playing catch up here, right? So that is going to be driving investment in some of these technologies that we know are going to be making a difference in terms of that, improving that customer experience, which is more important than ever before on the business side and on the consumer side.
Well, and you now get into this potential that those investments also are going to drive equity returns, which are going to improve the ability of those organizations to invest in the technologies, creating these virtuous cycles, but also potentially expanding that gap between the leaders and the laggards.
That's right, and we've been saying for some time that the success of a company is more than ever going to be determined by their ability to embrace digital technology, and this just emphasizes that point.
Indeed. All right. Well, with that, we're going to go on to surprise number 3. Is machine learning wildly successful? Well, clearly there's a lot of marketing that's out there that's identifying that machine learning and artificial intelligence are doing amazing things. But there's some aspects of that people need to keep in mind as they start diving into these in broad measure, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting one, and again, just comes out from some work that our AI and ML team, led by Nick Patience, have been producing. Just some super interesting research in what continues to be kind of one of the most interesting and important areas of the industry. We know this is super hot and has been for some time. But some of these takeaways are quite startling. Almost 2 in 5 ML projects at the proof of concept stage are abandoned. More than half of those unable to get access to their data abandon all of their ML projects. And model explainability in particular is surfacing as a real issue. So there was quite a lot in there. Let's maybe spend a few moments just to kind of unpack it. And I think the first thing is to remind ourselves that this is quite a new discipline. We know that AI in various forms has been around for years, but for many businesses, they are coming to this for in the last couple of years, possibly for the first time, and it's in parts of the business where we've never really used these technologies before, including in the IT department. So, on the one hand, it's great that the ambition is there to really do something different and embrace this technology, but the realities of doing this are quite stark. It's difficult to do this in a really, really a successful way, at least from the get-go. So maybe to take the first of these, let's look at why projects are abandoned. So the big two challenges that we see are accessing and integrating data, and as I say, model explainability. So I'll talk about the data access in a minute, but this issue of model explainability is notable because it is quite new, but it is obviously features quite prominently. I think ultimately the challenge here is just the immaturity of the tools. But there's also, I think, a gap often between the end users, if you like, the consumers of the data that are investing in these projects, and the data scientists that are often creating the models. If the end user, if the consumer of the model can't explain how the conclusions from the data were arrived at, then the whole process starts to break down. And right now, there's too big a gap between the very scientific, down in the weeds aspect of the data scientist and those end users. I think also we're moving to a very different type of environment. This kind of heavily model-based environment. It's very different to kind of, if you think about traditional software development, rules-based environments. That's a very different environment. So, when the data changes, the model changes. So, to be on top of this, you need to be on top of things like, model drift, data decay, understanding bias, these things that are changing. You have to be aware of those to ensure that the model is up to date and relevant. And as I say, there is a gap in understanding there.
Well, and there's process and orchestration that's necessary to manage that. You're identifying, the process of updating models. You've got to ensure that you've got all the pieces in place to be able to manage that efficiently and effectively. A whole set of, it is a discipline into and of itself, and it is a workflow into and of itself.
It really is. And so here's my final slides, really, just a bit more of a drill down into the accessibility, which remains the number one reason for that project abandonment. I guess the good news is that it does appear that those challenges are subsiding slightly. So we see that more respondents this year said they were having no difficulty. So that is definitely good news as the kind of tech and the ecosystem matures. But it's also apparent that the machine learning code, that piece is only a small piece of the overall system. And one of the challenges is that, as well as getting that piece right, you've got to get the whole system that surrounds that right as well, and that means coordinating multiple aspects right across the environment, the infrastructure, the monitoring, the resource management, configuration, data collection and extraction. That's even before you get to the actual data analysis itself. So it is very complex. But as I say, as services around this mature, as the technology itself matures, it does appear to be getting easier. So hopefully the wind is blowing in the right direction. We are heading in the right direction here.
So the sails are full, but there's still a bit of a journey to go.
That's right.
Well, and I think that really is one of the things, the takeaways from all three of the surprises that we've talked about today. These are things that organizations are moving forward, but one of the challenges is how do you figure out, the appropriate directions? How do you set your compass, chart your course? How do you manage where it is? And these are those aspects that 451 Alliance data can really help to be able to drive and put together. So we want to make sure that we've got time for questions. So if you've got questions, please put them in the Q&A box down at the bottom. We'll try to get to as many as we can in the time that we have. But of course, we'll follow up with any of you for any questions that remain unanswered. So with that, we will drive to questions. A couple to start off with. First, how do you see public cloud being used for AI and ML?
So that is that's a great question, actually. Yeah. So how do we see this? The bottom line is that cloud is already a standard operating environment for many AI projects. In fact, when we looked at this in our research and surveys, cloud came out as the number one venue for deploying an ML or AI project. So it's happening today in the public cloud, in particular. And you know, there are all sorts of benefits to that. One of the biggest advantages, I guess, is just the scalability. Is that, you know, often when you're embarking on one of these projects, you're maybe not entirely sure how big or how small or how fast these projects are going to ramp. And obviously, a clear advantage of the cloud model is that you don't need to set that in advance. You can just expand as you grow. So really, the agility aspect there is absolutely you know, crucial to the success of these projects, and allowing companies to, you know, to start and go at their own pace without kind of having to understand the ultimate size of the investment right at the outset. And then you kind of add in all of the tools and capabilities that have been added in those cloud environments, and often and increasingly, actually, some of the specific hardware acceleration, some of the chip capabilities that are available to run different types of projects and models. You know, it's absolutely a key part of the environment. It's not the only way that AI is being deployed today, but it certainly is a huge part of it.
All of those good cloud benefits are the latest in tech and scale.
Absolutely.
So second question we've got, do we have data on why organizations are moving workloads? Coming back to our repatriation question.
Yeah, so as I say, so there's no doubt that organizations are moving workloads, whether we want to call that repatriation. I'd rather we didn't, because I don't think it's the best exemplifies why this is happening. But, you know, again, I think
we decided it's not a thing. So
it really depends, or it varies. Is the typical kind of analyst answer, but it's we also see, you know, a whole range of reasons. I'd say. Actually, for the data center audience, things like you know, shadow IT is still sometimes talked about and referred to as a reason. Don't think it's the primary reason anymore, but it certainly comes up from time to time. And then it's a combination of things like, you know, security concerns, application lifecycle considerations. Occasionally, we see regulatory and governance reasons for bringing a workload on premises. Obviously, a changing environment globally, and so that may be necessary from time to time. And in with that is data sovereignty. So, you know, it continues to be a mix. You know, for some organizations, at some point, at certain levels of scale, cost may be a factor. So it's you know, it varies, but I think you know, it's increasingly just going to be part of how the world works. We're going to see, as I say, we're going to see this fluid model with movement of applications at different points in their life cycle.
And placing them where they are best executed, and
that's right.
And you've got the ability to understand how to manage and provision those sorts of capabilities. All sorts of good stuff.
Indeed.
Well, we are at time. Thank you, Simon, for all the insights. Some great data to work with. Thank you for our audience for hanging in there. If you are interested in joining the 451 Alliance, be sure to sign up at 451alliance.com/NIT. And we hope that you'll join me and my guests, like Simon, on the Next in Tech podcast, because there is always something next in tech.